Hey, Michael David Riggs here. I want to talk to you for a minute about the season of rejoicing. You know, there's something about rejoicing that drives our enemy crazy because his weapon is fear. And when we're rejoicing, we're not in fear. And actually, Philippians chapter 1 says, when the enemy can't terrify us by any of his attempts, that is to him great evil. The King James uses the word perdition, but it means evil. Why? Because his one thing is to use lies to cause us to get in fear and be reactionary instead of depending on God and filled with His Spirit. And we're coming into a season of rejoicing. Head of the year on the biblical calendar, the Hebrew calendar, Rosh Hashanah, and then 9 days later after Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and then 5 days later, starting on the 15th of the 7th month, is the Feast of Tabernacles. And it's a season of rejoicing. And we find the story there in Ezra. I think it's Ezra. It's either Ezra or Nehemiah. It's Ezra chapter 8, verse 10. Nehemiah is part of the playing out of the story, but it's Ezra, where we find that they're initiating in the 7th month the feast of the Lord. They're blessing them. They're telling them not to cry and mourn, but to rejoice. And they say, "For the joy of the Lord shall be your strength." Now, the word strength there is, I think it's the Hebrew word oz, which is the most often word for strength in the Hebrew Old Testament, Hebrew Scriptures. But it means more than just energy in life. Actually, I think that's not even the main reason. It's stronghold. Yes, because when we rejoice in the Lord and His goodness, we are lifted up, placed into a stronghold far above the reach of the enemy. That's another Hebrew concept called migdol. But same thing in the word oz, stronghold is that which is out of the reach of the enemy or surrounded by God's protection so the enemy can't get to us. So it's a season of rejoicing, and that's just a pattern that we ought to observe every 7th month on the Hebrew calendar, but it ought not to end there. It ought to be year-round, continuous. Why? Because it's a cycle that God wants us to live in, so we live in His cycle of life. 1 John chapter 1, verse 1. Jesus is the word of life. Psalm 27:1. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? So I encourage you in this season of joy, season of rejoicing, rejoice. Find reason to be thankful. Find reason to rejoice in the goodness of our God. Shalom to you.